Somebody get me out of this tiny office. Nobody puts Katie in a corner. Guys, welcome to Loud Poets Happy Hour. I am Dr. Katie Ailes, and I am the host of Happy Hour. If you haven't seen it before, this is our show in which we take on poetry writing challenges. We offer some guidance on how to complete them, we write them ourselves, and we chat about all of them with you. You can watch all of the episodes in Happy Hour through the playlist linked over there in the eye. And to make sure that you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes, please do like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring that beautiful bell icon. So the way that Happy Hour works is that if you support us on Patreon, you get to submit challenges for us to write to. So definitely check out our Patreon, guys. And the winning challenge this time was from our dear pal, the Edinburgh-based poet Carl Alexanderson. Carl challenged us to write poetry about being 17, that magical, difficult, and turbulent age where you're still a teenager, still technically a child, but just on the cusp of adulthood. This is such a wonderful challenge because it allows us to reflect on coming-of-age stories, art about that time in our lives where we are shaping our own identities, going through change and conflict and growth, and ultimately learning who we are and shaping who we are. So in this video, I'm going to focus on coming-of-age stories in poetry and other art, and give you some guidance to write about that period in your life. Whether your 17th birthday was decades ago, or maybe you haven't hit it yet, hopefully the guidance I provide in today's video will help you to write about change and growth and periods of transition in your life. As always, every example that I mention will be linked in the description below, so let's get to it and let's start here. As we'll explore in this video, there is so much poetry and art more broadly about the end of childhood and the transition into adulthood, both by young people going through that transition at the time and by older people who are reflecting upon that period in their lives. Obviously, everyone's life, everyone's journey is unique, so not all of the coming-of-age tropes and examples and incidents will be relevant to your life, but for many people, the age of 17 is one of awakening. It's about trying to understand and identify your body, yourself, your place in the world, and often about feeling misunderstood and trying to assert your own identity, even as you're just starting to figure out what that is yourself. Perhaps at 17, you're moving away from home for the first time for work or education and having the opportunity, but also the challenge of redefining yourself. And let's get real, it's also a time of physical awakening, of changing bodies, of desire and hormones and first times, whatever that has meant for you or is meaning for you. All of this makes it a very sensory age. Often everything feels dramatic, consequential, important. You're told to make decisions that will impact the rest of your life. So everything just feels heightened and full of energy and passion and drama, whether that's good or bad. And all of that drama can spill over into the art about that age. I look back on the poetry that I wrote from when I was 17, and while it's a little bit over the top, I love the energy and the passion and the curiosity of it. And I sometimes wish that I could reharness that. So while, yeah, it's a little melodramatic, at least it's not meh. So my first tip here, when you're writing about youth, about the age of 17, about coming of age more broadly, this is not the time to be minimalist. Try to channel the passion, the angst, the frustration, the drama of that age. Write big, write bold, write with all five senses. Open the floodgates and do not cramp your style. And for some very bold, sensory, fantastic poetry, watch this. One of the most prominent poets in the Scottish spoken word scene, and someone who we've featured frequently at our shows and on this channel, is the brilliant Kat Hepburn. A couple of years ago, Kat premiered her solo show Girlhood and the accompanying poetry pamphlet released by Speculative Books. It's all about the experience of being a girl and a young woman today. all of the thrill and the pain, and how sexism and gender impact that experience. Here, I want to feature one of the cinepoems created through the show, the stunning piece, Cherry. Here's the beginning.
Cammy. A lanky skater boy with a floppy fringe in the year above. This isn't a one-night stand or anything. No, he's my boyfriend of 3 months, 2 weeks and 1 day. And we spend Thursday evenings in HMV and he buys me a Mickey D's and a Cinnabon every Saturday. It's serious enough to have our initials carved out on a heart on a tree by the river in the park.
You can watch the rest of this poem along with several other poems from girlhood on Kat's channel, linked in the eye. So one thing that I love about this poem is all of the sensory detail. There's so many specific references which cite us exactly in Scotland in the early to mid noughties. You know, you have the hair gel, you have the bottles of Lambrini, you have the older woman from Aviemore. All of these specific references really put us in the setting of that poem, put us in the world in which the poem takes place. The other reason I wanted to feature this poem in this video is because of its focus on a first. Now again, everyone has their own journey, their own timeline, but broadly speaking, your late teens and early 20s are a period full of firsts. Obviously, the first that this poem explores is the first time having sex, and desire and sensuality are huge themes of coming-of-age narratives. But of course, and I really want to emphasize this, having sex is not the only first that can occur in your late teens, early 20s, in this period of your life. It's a period full of firsts. So when writing poetry about this age, a starting point might be to think about all of these firsts as they happened in your own life. Your first real job, your first time driving a car, your first time living away from home. These can be specific as well as broad. So it might be your first time figuring out a laundry machine on your own, your first pair of heels that you bought with your own money, or your first suit, your first illicit cigarette, or hangover. And as you're writing about a first, think about how it differed from your expectations. How did it surprise you, pleasantly or unpleasantly? What myths were you told that were disproven through your experience? Fold all of this into your writing about firsts. And for more poetry about new realizations and experiences, read this. So I am a massive, massive fan of Carol Ann Duffy, as is probably evident here. In my opinion, there are few contemporary writers who can articulate as many experiences and themes as eloquently, powerfully, and accessibly as Carol Ann Duffy can. Some of my favorite poems by Duffy focus on nostalgia and the past, specifically on childhood and the sweet pain of growing up. Here, I want to feature her poem In Mrs. Tilsher's Class from her 1990 collection, The Other Country. This poem is not specifically about being 17, it's likely about being a bit younger, but here I want to highlight it because of its theme of learning and education. The poem is set at school, and of course, school is the setting for much of our childhoods and teenage years. It's not only where we receive formal education, but also where we develop friendships and community and mentorships, good and bad. The poem starts in the classroom. Here's the opening stanza. You could travel up the blue Nile with your finger, tracing the route while Mrs. Tilsher chanted the scenery. Tana, Ethiopia, Khartoum, Aswan. That for an hour, then a skittle of milk and the chalky pyramids rubbed into dust. A window opened with a long pole, the laugh of a bell swung by a running child. The poem plays on the theme of what we're meant to be learning, what we're taught through the school curriculum, and what we're learning extracurricularly. About halfway through, the young person in the poem is rudely informed by a classmate how babies are made, and their reaction evolves from shock and being appalled to curiosity and a growing sense of their own sensuality. The final couplet is one of my favorites in Duffy's body of work. You ran through the gates, impatient to be grown, as the sky split open into a thunderstorm. Duffy's poem captures so brilliantly the urgency of that time in our lives, our need to understand ourselves, the world, and our place within it. So when you're writing poetry about that age, think about the role of learning and knowledge, and I mean that broadly. What were you taught, in school and out of school? Who taught you? What lessons proved most valuable? What do you wish you knew then? What do you wish you had never learned? Try to really infuse your poetry about coming of age with this hunger, this curiosity to understand that defines that age for so many of us. And now to continue your education into coming of age narratives, look elsewhere. You can't talk about coming-of-age narratives without mentioning film. Many of the best films ever made center on the experiences of young people on the cusp of adulthood, whether they're made for a YA audience or not. Just to skim the surface of a massive genre, some of the most acclaimed films about the experience of the end of childhood and entrance into adulthood include Rebel Without a Cause, The Breakfast Club, Juno, Mean Girls, Persepolis, Moonlight, Lady Bird, Boyhood, and Call Me by Your Name. A lot of these films are about gender, sexuality, relationships, and finding your identity, often through painful realizations. I'm going to briefly focus on one coming-of-age film, and it's not just because it's one of my favorite films of all time. I actually have a relevant point here. We gotta talk about the wonderful Dirty Dancing. You can swoon until the cows come home over Patrick Swayze. The love story in this film is obviously iconic, but what I want to talk about here, and what I think really makes the film such a fantastic coming-of-age narrative, is Baby's relationship with her father. Without dissecting the whole film, basically throughout the narrative, Baby has her faith in her father as this infallible good person ruptured, and she has to learn to rely on her own moral compass just as she's developing it herself. A major element of coming of age is recognizing the fallibility of adults. They're not perfect. They don't have all the answers, and we're swiftly becoming them. So as you're writing about this time of your life, think about the realizations that you had at that point about adulthood, and perhaps how the relationships that you had with the adults in your life changed because of those realizations. Finally, keep in mind that we've never felt this way before. And remember, as we age and develop, our voices change, and I don't just mean that in the physical sense. Our identities develop, and with them, how we relate to others, how we speak, how we carry ourselves, how we interact in social situations. So when you're writing and performing poetry about a certain period of your life, try to recapture, re-embody the voice, the physicality that you would have used at that age, your vocabulary, your mannerisms, your gestures. For a great example of this, I've linked in the eye to a video of Neil Hilborn performing his poem Punk Rock John, which is about a mentor to him in the punk rock scene when he was in his teens. The poem is performed with this frenetic, desperate energy. It's highly physical and breathless. There's tons of gesture. It's a lot to watch. But that performance style feels fitting for the poem, which is about teenage angst, despair, the throes of uncontrollable emotion. Similarly, think back to the earlier example of Kat Hepburn's poem Cherry. For that video, she's dressed herself younger, used younger makeup, she's lying stomach down on a bed, writing in her journal. So the entire physicality and costuming, apparel of the video assumes the youth that the poem is focused on. So as you're writing poetry about coming of age, about this period in your life, really try to channel not just the voice, not just the vocabulary about that age, but the full physicality, what it felt like to be 17. And that is all for my 5 top tips on writing coming-of-age poetry. Guys, I hope that however old, however young you are, you got something out of this video that will inform your writing practice. Thank you, as always, for checking out this video, and do stay tuned for the check-in and full episode on this challenge coming out next week. Remember that to support our work and to be able to submit your own challenges for us to write to, you can sign up to our Patreon for as little as £1 per month. Please do like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, ring that bell icon, do all the good stuff. Honestly, guys, your support really makes a difference. It means the world to us. So thank you as always, and happy writing.